Hey friends, welcome back for another chapter of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Today we'll be reading chapter number 25 called The Great Glass Elevator. If you remember in chapter 24, Veruca went into the nut room, the spoiled little brat of a girl who has everything in the world, wanted one of Mr. Wonka's trained squirrels. Even though he told her no, she ran in to get one anyway. She ended up getting thrown down the garbage chute by the squirrels along with her mom and dad. So now there are only two children left, Mike Teavee and Charlie Bucket, and they're about to go for a fantastic ride in Mr. Wonka's Great Glass Elevator. Let's read. "I've never seen anything like it," cried Mr. Wonka. "The children are disappearing like rabbits." "But you mustn't worry about it. They all come out in the wash." Mr. Wonka looked up at the little group that stood beside him in the corridor. There were only two children left now, Mike Teavee and Charlie Bucket, and there were three grown-ups, Mr. and Mrs. Teavee and Grandpa Joe. "Shall we move on?" Mr. Wonka said. "Oh, yes," cried Charlie and Grandpa Joe both together. "My feet are getting tired," said Mike Teavee. "I want to watch television." "If you're tired, then we better take the elevator," said Mr. Wonka. "It's over here. Come on, in we go." He skipped across the passage to a pair of double doors. The doors slid open. The two children and the grown-ups went in. "Now then," cried Mr. Wonka, "which button shall we press first? Take your pick." Charlie Bucket stared around him in astonishment. This was the craziest elevator he had ever seen. There were buttons everywhere. The walls and even the ceilings were covered with all over with rows and rows and rows of small black push buttons. There must have been 1,000 of them on each wall and another 1,000 on the ceiling. And now Charlie noticed that every single button had a tiny printed label beside it telling you which room you would be taken to if you pressed it. "This isn't just an ordinary up and down elevator," announced Mr. Wonka proudly. "This elevator can go sideways and long ways and slant ways and any other ways you can think of. It can visit any single room in the whole factory, no matter where it is. You simply press the button and zing, you're off." "Fantastic," murmured Grandpa Joe. His eyes were shining with excitement as he stared at the rows and rows of buttons. "The whole elevator is made of thick, clear glass," Mr. Wonka declared. "Walls, doors, ceiling, floor, everything made of glass so that you can see out." "But there's nothing to see," said Mike Teavee. "Choose a button," said Mr. Wonka. "The two children may press one button each, so take your pick. Hurry up. In every room something delicious and wonderful is being made." Quickly, Charlie started reading some of the labels alongside the buttons. "The Rock Candy Mine, 10,000 feet deep," it said on one. Coconut ice skating rinks," it said on another. Then, "Strawberry juice water pistols. Toffee apple trees for planting out in your garden, all sizes. Exploding candy for your enemies. Luminous lollies for eating in bed at night. Mint jujubes for the boy next door. They'll give him green teeth for a month. Cavity-feeling caramels. No more dentist. Stick jaw for talkative parents. Wriggle streets that wriggle delightfully in your tummy after swallowing. Invisible chocolate bars for eating in class. Candy-coated pencils for sucking. Fizzy lemonade swimming pools. Magic hand fudge. When you hold it in your hand, you taste it in your mouth. Rainbow drops. Suck them, and you can spit in 6 different colors." Come on, cried Mr. Wonka. "We can't wait all day." "Isn't there a television room in all of this lot?" asked Mike Teavee. "Certainly there's a television room," Mr. Wonka said. "That button over there." He pointed with his finger. Everyone looked. "Television chocolate," it said on the tiny label beside the button. "Whoopee!" shouted Mike Teavee. "That's for me." And he stuck out his thumb and pressed the button. Instantly, there was a tremendous whizzing noise, and the doors clanged shut, and the elevator leaped away as though it had been stung by a wasp. But it leapt sideways, and all the parents, except Mr. Wonka, of course, who was holding onto a strap from the ceiling, were flung off their feet onto the floor. Get up, cried Mr. Wonka, roaring with laughter. But just as they were staggering to their feet, the elevator changed directions and swerved violently round a corner, and over they went once more. "Help!" shouted Mrs. Teavee. "Take my hand, madam," said Mr. Wonka gallantly. "There you are. Now, grab this strap." Everybody, grab a strap. The journey's not over yet. Old Grandpa Joe staggered to his feet and caught hold of a strap. Little Charlie, who couldn't possibly reach as high, put his arms around Grandpa Joe's legs and hung on tight. The elevator rushed on at the speed of a rocket. Now it was beginning to climb. It was shooting up, up, up on a steep, slanty course, as if it were climbing a very steep hill. Then suddenly, as though it had come to the top of the hill and gone over the precipice, it dropped like a stone, and Charlie felt his tummy coming right up into his throat. And Grandpa Joe shouted, "Yippee! Here we go!" And Mrs. Teavee cried out, "The rope was broken. We're going to crash." And Mr. Wonka said, "Calm yourself, my dear lady," and patted her comfortably on the arm. And then Grandpa Joe looked down at Charlie, who was clinging to his legs, and he said, Are you all right, Charlie?" Charlie shouted, "I love it. It's like being on a roller coaster." And through the glass walls of the elevator, as it rushed along, they caught sudden glimpses of strange and wonderful things going on in some of the other rooms. An enormous spout with brown sticky stuff oozing out of it onto the floor. A great craggy mountain made entirely of fudge, with Oompa Loompas all roped together for safety, hacking huge chunks of fudge out of its sides. A machine with white powder spraying out of it like a snowstorm. A lake of hot caramel with steam coming out of it. A village of Oompa Loompas with tiny houses and streets, and hundreds of Oompa Loompas' children, no more than 4 inches high, playing in the streets. And now the elevator began flattening out again, but it seemed to be going faster than ever, and Charlie could hear the scream of the wind outside as it hurled forward, and it twisted, and it turned, and it went up, and it went down, and... "I'm going to be sick," yelled Mrs. Teavee, turning green in the face. "Please don't be sick," said Mr. Wonka. "Try and stop me," said Mrs. Teavee. "Then you better take this," said Mr. Wonka, and he swept his magnificent black top hat off his head and held it out upside down in front of Mrs. Teavee's mouth. "Make this awful thing stop," ordered Mr. Teavee. "Can't do that," said Mr. Wonka. "It won't stop until we get there. I only hope that no one's using the other elevator at the moment." "What other elevator?" screamed Mrs. Teavee. "The one that goes the opposite way, on the same track as this one," said Mr. Wonka. "Holy mackerel!" cried Mr. Teavee. "You mean we might have a collision?" "I've always been lucky so far," said Mr. Wonka. "Now I am going to be sick," yelled Mrs. Teavee. "No, no," said Mr. Wonka. "Not now. We're nearly there. Don't spoil my hat." The next moment, there was a screaming of brakes, and the elevator began to slow down. Then it stopped altogether. "Some ride," said Mr. Teavee, wiping his great sweaty face with his handkerchief. "Never again," gasped Mrs. Teavee. And then the doors of the elevator slid open, and Mr. Wonka said, "Just a minute now. Listen to me. I want everyone to be very careful in this room. There is dangerous stuff around in here, and you must not tamper with it." And that's the end of chapter 25. Next time we read chapter 26, we're going to learn all about the television chocolate room.